Hello, good afternoon. Welcome everyone who's joining. Just give a few minutes for people to come in. Do say a quick hello in the chat. Let us know where you're from, and that might be your organization or where you might be today. We'll give a couple of minutes just to welcome everyone, and then we'll get underway. I see some familiar names there. Hello, Lisa. Nice to see you. Lucinda. Who else have we got there? Adrian Barnes. Welcome. Chris Heverin, g'day Chris, how are you? Matthew Williams. Louise from Bicycle Network, hello there. Lisa, thanks Lisa. Roderick van Gelder, hey Rod, from Stage Safety. Michael Priest, I see there, welcome. Typically we do talk about the weather. It seems like it's getting a bit fresh down there at the moment. Lynn from Surf Coast Shire. Hello there, Lynn. Dave Budge from the event team, sitting in the background, checking out what's happening here in terms of Gemma's answers. I'm sure you've got it under control, Gemma. Send him back up the coast for another holiday, huh? All right, I make it about 1 minute past. We'll just wait another minute to let some more people in. I think we had about 70 people registered today, as always with these things. Quite a lot of people will listen to the recording. But as always as well, welcome your questions. I've got the chat box up in front of me, obviously reading some of these. So feel free, if you've got a question on the way through, drop it in. And I'll feed it in either in the chat or in the Q&A. I've got both of those boxes in front of me. So yeah, feel free to pop those in, and we'll try and weave them into the conversation as we go through. A few more people coming in. We'll give it another minute or so, and then we'll get underway. Haley Mason, hi there, Haley. Kate Patterson, hello, Kate. Nikki Sorrell, hello, Nikki. All right, why don't we get rid of the holding slide so you can see everyone, and we'll get underway. Make it a little bit. There you go. And I think you probably many of you have been on these now, but you can put the settings how you want to either spot the speaker. If you're doing that at the moment, you get my ugly mug on the screen, or you can just have the mosaic and see everyone at the same time. But a big welcome for those of you that don't know me. I'm Chris Robb. I'm the CEO and founder of Mass Participation World. Delighted to be hosting another one of these AMSI webinars, where today we talk about events that have taken place, some amazing case studies we have today talking about the COVID-19. We're going to talk about managing commercial risk and a number of other elements. I think there's going to be some great learnings that come out of this. We've got a wonderful panel, wonderful to see an all-women panel as well. Delighted to be hosting, and delighted to start maybe down in Melbourne, where we have two of our panelists today. Sarah Smith, the head of marketing for Spartan Australia. Hello there, Sarah.
Hi, thank you for having me.
And Sarah Clements, the general manager of Mother's Day Classic Foundation, also in Melbourne. Hello, Sarah. Great to see you.
Hey, Chris. Pleasure.
Heading across the country to Perth, we have Gemma Dale, the managing director of the event team. Hey, Gemma.
Hey, Chris. How you going?
Great, thanks. Great to see you. Thanks for joining us. So just a little bit of housekeeping and a couple of announcements before we get underway. As we're in webinar mode, no cameras, obviously. Please keep yourself mute, and I think the system automatically does that. The best way to communicate is through the Q&A and or in the chat, and I'll try and curate those as we go through. If we have some time at the end, we've got about 45 minutes. We may be able to turn some cameras on, ask some specific questions. The way to do that is to raise your hand. We've got a whole bunch of case studies to talk about today. We're going to talk about Spartan, Sunshine Coast and Port Stephens. We're going to talk about the Mother's Day Classic, which was an incredible pivot to 75 events around the country. Mother's Day Classic local, and I think some great lessons for many people there. And then we're going to talk about the Bustleton Jetty Swim and Ironman 70.3. And again, a couple of these events kind of suspended midway some great learnings. And if I'm right, Sarah was probably the unique one that managed to have their events go ahead without too many interruptions. But maybe I've got my facts wrong there. We'll hear from that in a moment. So just a couple of very quick announcements. As I said at the top, I'm the CEO of Mass Participation World. I know some of you have been joining us over COVID. We've got a fantastic webinar tomorrow night in our fortnightly MPW web series. It's called The New Partnership Landscape, Challenges and Opportunities. And we really have an amazing panel. We have the head of sponsorship sales for the London Marathon. Those of you would have seen they just announced TCS as their new title partner last week. So I think some really great insights there. That is, Brian Greenwood. We have Caroline Darcy, who'll be actually joining us from Melbourne. She's the global head of sponsorship and events for Standard Chartered. They have a portfolio, of those of you that may not be aware, of 10 marathons and running events that they sponsor. We have Gunnar Kalyanan he's the CEO of O4 Company based out of Singapore. He's going to be giving some great insights into content. He's got a really great career in terms of working for companies like Singtel and the like. And then Rob Mills, who started off life in Australia. He was the sponsorship manager for Adidas for many years, gone on to do amazing things with the like of Jemba, and he's now the director and global CEO of Tenka Group. And I think Mishi's going to join us. We'll ask her to pop the link in there if you'd like to register. But I think it's going to be a wonderful webinar. And then just very quickly, some of you would have seen that we've been running the MPW COVID transmission study, and we've been gathering data from around the world of participants and volunteers in events. And we put these statistics out every week, and it's an absolutely mind-blowing statistic. Last week's number was 2,327,995 for only 2 reported COVID cases. And what we're trying to do is give this data as widely as possible for people to use in their submissions as another talking point or another proof point that there's limited risk outdoors. I was informed last week, you would have seen Berlin Marathon announced that they've got a date. They actually used our data. And there's a couple of other events that use that data in their submission along with other data. So I'm very, very pleased that that's having impact. And also, just to let you know, without taking up a lot more time, is that we're busy working at MPW on creating what we're calling a digital media kit, which will be a selection of videos, graphics and the like, proof points around it's safer to participate outdoors and the health and well-being impact that our event has. And the idea is that we're creating this kit that we're going to distribute globally. Our hope is we'd hope to have it done before the Olympics. It will probably be after the Olympics. We're working with an agency out of the UK, working with the likes of World Athletics and World Marathon Majors and the like to get some ambassadors and so on board to help the industry. So if that's of any interest to you, please connect with me. But let's get going with what we're going to be talking about today in terms of impact of COVID on events. And let's start by going across to you, Sarah, to get some insights. You had your Spartan event in Port Stephens. The event went ahead, and then a couple of days later, Sydney put more restrictions in place, which meant you had to do a whole bunch of track and trace, kind of almost retrospectively. Can you share with us a little bit about what that entailed and how you managed it and some of the challenges and maybe the lessons, please?
Yeah, so we ran our event the first weekend of May. Sydney had a positive COVID case that became apparent, I think, on the Monday or Tuesday post the event. We were contacted by New South Wales Health on the Tuesday and asked to make sure that we had all our contact tracing details ready to go. Given the proximity, our event was in Port Stephens, which is about a 2-hour drive from Sydney. About 70% of our participants actually came out of the Sydney market. So New South Wales Health were really keen to make sure we had done what we needed to do in terms of contact tracing. We then went out to our racer database and said, this is the facts, this is what's happened, this is what you need to do, had links through to the New South Wales Health advice so that people could see the exposure sites, also ask them if they had been to an exposure site to confidentially contact us through one of our senior leadership team to let us know that they had been at those sites, because obviously we needed to report that back to New South Wales Health. we were really lucky. Our team had been really on top of contact tracing, so we had all those details available. I think probably the biggest learning we had was where we are using staff or volunteer to man entry points. We need to make sure that they understand the requirements of why contact tracing needs to happen as well, because if we had a situation where we couldn't provide contact details, obviously that's a risk not only to our business but the entire events industry, and New South Wales approving permits for events ongoing. So that was really as simple as that for our New South Wales event.
So pretty straightforward, but the key obviously making sure those volunteers. How is the contact tracing done? It's I think there's a number of different options, or is it kind of prescribed by New South Wales Health in terms of how?
I believe it is now. At that point, it hadn't been, so we were using our own contact tracing system, which was a Google form, and that worked really well for us because it did mean that people had to show our staff that they had completed that form and got that tick. We have now moved to the New South Wales Health for our next lot of events, and Victoria and Queensland have done the same thing. So if that were to occur again, we would rely on the government going out and contacting people. We obviously have our own registration data, but we don't have access to what we had for the New South Wales event.
So what you seem to be saying is literally you'd have to pass your database over and the government would then take control and send that out.
They should have it through their contact tracing apps. So everyone checking in on the New South Wales Health or the Vic Health apps at the moment, but we would have to give them our data from our RACER database as well.
Mm-hmm. And I'm guessing, excuse me, no positives that came out of that?
Luckily, no positives. I don't even think New South Wales had very many positives after that. So that was quite a good outcome for New South Wales and for our team as well.
Great, thanks for that, Sarah. Let's move across to you, Sarah, and give us a bit of an insight. Quite an interesting pivot you did. Give us a quick oversight of how you moved from a bunch of big, mostly city-based events and quite a lot of rural events to this Mother's Day Classic local, and a few insights into what you did there, please.
Yeah, absolutely. Chris, do you mind if I just come back on some of Sarah's points? Because I thought it would be interesting for everyone to know, obviously, Mother's Day Classic was the weekend after, on the 9th of May. And that also directly impacted us because we saw instantly just a complete halt on our Sydney registration. So certainly had an impact on our participation numbers up there, but also we were contacted by the government to send out a notification to all of our Victorian participants who might have come from Sydney. So, but we were able to do that just through our website. We didn't over-rotate on social media or anything like that, but it had a bit of an impact on us too.
Yeah, I hadn't realised that. Thanks for that
update.
Yeah.
No worries. Yeah, so Mother's Day Classic. It's for those of you, a little bit of background. It's owned and managed by the Mother's Day Classic Foundation. Our number one focus is to find a cure for breast cancer. That's my little thing. My icon says, and we do that by raising funds for breast cancer research and uniting the community around Australia for, I guess, the 1 in 7 women who will be diagnosed with breast cancer in their lifetime in Australia, which is a shocking statistic, and it's actually getting worse, not better. So the work is more important than ever. But the platform, obviously, in which we deliver on those objectives, primarily raising funds, is the Mother's Day Classic. So we started in 1998 and 2022 is our 25th anniversary. And obviously, sitting here now, 15 months ago, we didn't know we would be sitting here, but with, I guess, some brave decisions of the management team and our board, we took the position that COVID was a time to evolve and thrive, and obviously not just survive. So, Mother's Day Classic is normally up to 100 events around Australia, with 100,000 people participating around Australia. So major events in all capital cities, and some 80 to 95 regional events around Australia as well. So that was what 2019 looked like. 2020, basically in 48 hours, we use the word pivot way too much these days, but we pivoted from rolling out that plan for 2020 to a virtual Mother's Day Classic virtual. And that was in March 2020. I guess fast forward 2 months after that, we had more than 30,000 people participating in what was the Mother's Day Classic virtual, but also through our research, we knew that about 50,000 people participated either on the day or in the lead up to Mother's Day. And through that experience, I guess we realized that it wasn't just a virtual fundraising event, it was very, very much a community event as well. And it still got people out and exercising, and very much that, the number one factor was community. And so through that experience, and obviously we take our data and insights really seriously, and we're very guided by, they don't make our decisions, but they do strongly guide our decision making. And through our post-event 2020 research, we knew that in the COVID environment, we asked some very direct questions and discovered that about 50% of our participants would still want to participate within a COVID environment, but that they obviously wouldn't want to be involved in the mass scale. They wanted something more informal and more flexible. And about 20% of them still wanted to, while they wanted to register, they still wanted to participate in their own time and place. So with that gold insights, we set about building the concept for 2021. And I guess, again, fast forward a little, this time last year, we announced Mother's Day Classic Local. And at the time, I think this is the key for us, was, at every point in the journey, we've had to make really, really fast decisions. So we've had to go out and put a stake in the ground and not exactly know exactly where we would end up, but for example, a commitment that Mother's Day Classic would take place no matter what. And in doing that, we've just rolled out 75 locations around Australia, but they're in a far more informal and flexible concept. We knew that coming out of last year, our objectives didn't change in terms of fundraising, community and engagement, but we knew in the COVID environment, everything needed to be simple, certain, flexible, safe and scalable. So once again, we went about building the proposition of smaller events, but more events around Australia. And we ended up still having events in all the capital cities. So for example, you'd normally have Melbourne with 25 to 30,000 people. It was more like 4,000, but spread over 3 locations. And so we just had more locations around Australia. We ended up with around 40,000 people participating and over 50,000 registered and over 50,000 participating. And externally, by all accounts, obviously highly successful, but not without enormous challenges behind the scenes. Thanks.
Thanks, Sarah. Great. Yeah, I'd love to come back to you on a few things there as well, particularly around partners and how you were able to support your partners in a different event. But let's move across to Gemma, almost kind of like a worst nightmare scenario. Before we came on air, we were talking about events that were cancelled within a few hours the day before. You were cancelled mid-event. So the Busselton Jetty Swim and Ironman 70.3, day one out the way, day two had to cancel. Give us a little bit of the insight of the biggest challenges of that in terms of, please, cancelling an event midstream. What were some of your biggest communication challenges? There are lots of stakeholders involved there, I'm sure. Share with us some of those insights, please.
Yeah, it's an interesting one because we've had 2 mass participation events which have been impacted by snap lockdowns, essentially. And the one where we cancelled mid-event was actually easier to manage than the other one that was impacted. So we've had 2 events, the Busselton Jetty Swim and the Busselton 70.3, obviously both held in Busselton, which for those that don't know the WA geography, is about a 2.5-hour drive south of Perth. When we have a WA lockdown, it's always been in the Perth and Peel region. So there's an intrastate border between Perth and Busselton. So leading into the Busselton Jetty Swim this year, 14 days out from the event, we had our first snap lockdown in WA, and the first lockdown we'd had since April 2020. So it was a bit of a shock to the WA community, I think, and we certainly weren't used to it. We hadn't been touched as heavily by COVID as everyone else had. So it had all been smooth sailing up until that point. But so 14 days out from the event, we've got a snap lockdown. We've got a hard border between Perth and the event site. So that lockdown ended with about eight days to go, at which point there was no lockdown anymore, but the border remained between Perth and the Peel region and Busselton. So staff could get down there, but 2,000 to 2,500 participants couldn't get to Busselton until midnight on the night before the event. So the intrastate borders were due to lift midnight Saturday night. The event was due to start at 8 a.m. on Sunday. So that presented some challenges. We found that out on the 9:30 on Thursday night with a full week to go. The event itself is run by a volunteer committee, so we at the event team are contracted to manage a number of aspects of it, but the volunteer committee really make the decisions around that event. So we're on a Zoom chat with the entire committee at 10:30 at night on a Thursday night, trying to make some decisions. And the first one was that they want the event to proceed. So we all felt that the vast majority of participants would want to see the event proceed. So let's do everything we can to make this happen. So what we did was we implemented a Perth pack collection. Ordinarily for that event, there's a pack collection on the Saturday down in Busselton, and you can't get your pack anywhere else or any other time apart from Saturday afternoon or Sunday morning pre-event. So to facilitate Perth people coming, we opened up our office and had pack collection in Perth for 3 days for that event, the week of the event. And then the other thing that we did was postpone the start of the event by an hour to try and allow for as many people as possible to be able to make that trip down from Perth to Busselton on the Sunday morning, if that's what they chose to do. So it ended up going really well. We ended up with about 2/3 of participants still there on event day, but it certainly wasn't without its challenges, and it threw up the ugly side actually of participants. We had a lot of pushback. The minute we announced that we were proceeding, it meant that we weren't refunding people, and there was a lot of pushback at that point. People expected that, I can't make it down to Busselton. I can't be expected to drive down in that short period of time and then swim and then drive home safely. So I want my money back. So we certainly had a lot of that negative feedback, but as always, it was the vocal minority, and the vast majority of people still ended up coming along and participating in the event, and it all went really smoothly. So that one actually presented the most challenges, even though we had some lead time. It was more the attitude of participants for that one. The second one we had the 70.3 was held on the 1st of May, so only a few weeks ago. 8 days pre-event for that one, we had another snap lockdown, again in the Perth Peel region. As always, rumours fly around when you hear that there's going to be an announcement, so we were able to use that time to chat with the event owner and to make some contingencies and to plan around. So we had already bounced around a backup date, so we had that in our back pocket. We made some calls to the local government authority, made sure that they were still comfortable with that, kept that in our back pocket. This time lockdown was only for 3 days and it was over a weekend. So knowing that we were going to have some more information by the Monday pre-event, we thought that still gave us enough time to either cancel at that point or to proceed with the event the following weekend. So we were okay with that 3-day lockdown, and we actually had prepared for postponing. We were mentally prepared for postponing because we thought that those intrastate borders would remain up as they had in February. But again, the government's getting more flexible with their lockdowns. So actually what happened is they lifted the borders and we were free to go down and start building that site, and participants were able to come. So they just needed to wear their masks when they were down there until the day before the event, which was kind of perfect. And we had really good compliance with everyone attending from Perth. Check-ins were great, mask wearing was fantastic. So that looked really good from a PR perspective. We did have a lot of questions. So WA the event was getting bounced around in Parliament and questions asked about how we were able to proceed, which was a bit frustrating given we had all the approvals, we had an approved COVID safety plan and everything was, you know, in place. We had offers from public servants and politicians to help them out with various things, none of which eventuated, of course, but the offer was there. So we were able to proceed as planned. It didn't actually impact on us until 3 o'clock on event day. So 70.3, most of the event is complete by 3 o'clock. The Premier made another announcement at 3 o'clock that there'd been a further scare and that we weren't going into lockdown again, but masks were mandatory again. So given the vast majority of participants had travelled to Busselton from Perth, we didn't want to risk reputational damage, essentially. So we thought that it was quite feasible that someone who was at the event on the Saturday had come down from Perth and had previously visited one of the exposure sites. So we didn't want to be presenting that risk further to the Busselton community. Fortunately, at the time that the announcement was made, we had presentations on in an hour. So we had the local government representative there on site, we had the event owner there. So we quickly found a quiet place. And as Sarah said, these days it's all about making quick decisions. So we all sat in a room, made some really quick decisions. We sent a message straight out to the MCs to ask everyone to put masks on. Unfortunately, we had stocked up on PPEs, which to that point had hardly been touched. So we were able to distribute PPE around the event site. We could continue to allow the participants that were still out on course, of which there was only about 50. So they were allowed to proceed. There was no impact on them. We just had masks at the finish line for them. We asked everyone else around the event site to put masks on, and we cancelled the 4 o'clock presentations, which was a real shame. And if anything, the local government were probably not happy about that, but they were supportive anyway. And then we cancelled the Sunday events, which sounds like a bigger deal than it was because our Sunday events were much smaller. So it was a kids triathlon and it was a fun teams triathlon, the Sunday, and a junior development triathlon. So it only impacted about, we had about 300 registrations. They're the style of events that would have got walk-ups on the day, but as I said, the reputational risk was too great, so we made some quick decisions to cancel those. We had a little bit of pushback, but the local government was really supportive, as they always are down there, and the vast majority of people were supportive of what we'd done, and the fact that we managed to present the Saturday event to the vast majority of the audience for that weekend's event. They were really receptive and appreciative of that. So the impact was not huge in terms of suppliers and costs. Most of them were really supportive as well. They gave us an appropriate discount for not being there on the Sunday. So cost-wise, it wasn't a huge imposition, and we did refund all of those Sunday participants. But again, they were lower entry costs, so it wasn't a huge impact for the bottom line of the event.
Thanks, Gemma. Some great insights there. So you said quick decision. How long was quick decision? How long did you have to huddle for before you'd reach consensus?
I think everyone was on the same page. So really, and again, you know, the rumours swirl before the actual press conference takes place. So we already had contingencies in our mind, and everyone was on the same page. Local government was supportive. So we were probably together for half an hour, and then bang, it was done. Got social media messages up. We got MC messages out, and direct email to those affected on the Sunday.
And thank you. And so in terms of your communications pre-prepared strategy, was that a contingency that you had? Did you already have a pre-prepared announcement expecting that you might have a mid-event cancellation?
Not for a mid-event cancellation. I don't think we'd really thought that was a possibility. You think by the time you get to event day, you're good to go. But it was pretty simple because we had similar messages previously in the week leading up to it, so it wasn't hard to pull those together.
Yeah, thanks. Let's come back to you, Sarah. So you had Port Stephens, which things changed afterwards. Then you had Sunshine Coast, which was impacted by Melbourne. So you lost 20% of your participants who couldn't fly in from Melbourne. Significant impact on the event, but obviously also the local community. I'm interested to understand from a community perspective there. So hotels that weren't able to be taken up, obviously an impact. But we focus often on what the industry's done in terms of transferring industry entry fees, refunds, whatever. How did the local hospitality industry respond to it in terms of kind of parallels of what we as an industry might be doing?
Gemma touched on some really important points there with participants and their attitude. Our biggest challenge for Sunshine Coast was we didn't know what was going on. There was no transparency with where we were at. So Melbourne went into snap lockdown on the Thursday. We'd actually had a contingency plan in place post our Gold Coast event. So Gold Coast was our first event back post-COVID in November 2020. Majority of our team based in Melbourne, we couldn't get exemptions to travel to Queensland to deliver that event. So our senior team had put in place contingency, and we've now got, I guess, pockets of teams that we can call in other states if we need to. The biggest issue with Sunshine Coast was it was on the Thursday that Melbourne went into lockdown. Queensland said we're going to close our border, but there was no clear, when they made the announcement, this is what this means. We had staff in transit. We had staff in Queensland that had been there for 3 days. We had staff that had been there for 9 days. The Queensland Premier tweeted that anyone that had been in Melbourne in the last 14 days was going to have to go into lockdown, which meant our event couldn't go ahead. Chris and I were at the point where we were putting a contingency plan in place, working out who'd been in Melbourne, when they'd been in Melbourne, how we were going to access these people. So that obviously affected our staff. But going back to the local community, we were really lucky that we had a lot of Spartans that were on flights on a Thursday, and they flew into the Sunshine Coast knowing they were going to have to go into lockdown on the Sunshine Coast, but they chose to do that to keep that support up for the local community. They knew they weren't going to the event. But they did go into lockdown in the accommodation they had booked, which was allowed if they got there, I think, before 1 a.m. on the Friday morning. And that was feedback we got from the local hospitality groups, that it was great to have people there despite the fact they were in lockdown. And for a lot of them, they couldn't really do much, but they did put some money into the economy through things like Uber Eats and staying in the hotels and still flying in.
Interesting. So we've really have the case studies that we've had, mainly apart from obviously part of Sarah's portfolio, have been more like regional events where community is able to really come together, see it. Is there any kind of sense, Sarah, I'd like to come back to you to maybe follow up on that question of how you were able to deliver sponsor benefits, but also, what difference you've seen being on much more of a national scale. Everything I'm hearing around the world on all of the sessions that I host is it's just so localized. So, you get a state decision, you get a national decision, and Parkrun is a classic example in the UK. Everyone at the top of the level saying Parkrun should come back. Local councils are saying you can't come back. I guess that would have been your experience across the country, different COVID requirements. And I'm interested to hear if it was harder in the cities and less difficult in more regional areas, as I'm seem to be hearing from the other events where that local community kind of gets around, recognizes the impact, but maybe harder in main cities?
That's I'll keep it short, but it's could talk all day on this, of course. So generally yes, but I think easily there were, I think looking back, there were equal challenges in both regional and major cities. So if we look at the major cities in themselves, I think, and everyone listening in will know that one of the biggest challenges was the inconsistencies of legislation and guidelines across the country, and well beyond that, the interpretation of those guidelines are completely subjective and changing all the time, and timelines changing literally on a daily basis. So, but I have to say, and I saw a comment just come up before, without question, whether it was a major event in a capital city or the smallest regional town from Bem River to Port Hedland, or Bustleton, actually, the support from the local councils was extraordinary. They would do to be really fair to them, a lot of them just didn't know what they were dealing with themselves, and it was almost both ourselves and them holding hands at the same time and just working it out. But overall, just extraordinary support across Australia from every single council. So I would say the part of the problem in the major cities was we took our concept was basically low infrastructure, low risk, if you like, in terms of sunk cost, and for that reason, our permit requirements in theory were a lot less. But I think coming right up to the events, we really noticed that once the council switched on, there was an unusually harsh rigour on risk management, and we've done all of this work on COVID safe planning, and with the greatest respect to the challenges that everyone is facing across Australia, we found that in most cases it was just at the other end, it was just a tick in the box. I'm not sure that really many people even opened up those COVID safe plans and looked at them, and often it wasn't required legislatively, but councils made the decision themselves also to tick a box to make it a requirement to submit a COVID safe plan. So we created COVID safe plan templates for all of our locations around Australia. I think the challenges for the regional events, of which we really had probably about 60 regional, urban and regional locations, was not only the inconsistency, but I think the risk management rigour that we also took across all of that planning, and because our concept required a far more rigorous national head office, almost mothership oversight of all of these events, we were asking the hosts in these locations to do a lot more than they normally would. And we certainly found that in the feedback that we're getting from them is that they were in turn being asked by their councils across Australia for probably double the compliance requirements that they normally would. So like the ladies have said, Mother's Day Classic is fueled by goodwill and run on a volunteer network. So it's a real risk, I think, moving forward, that it's just going to be too hard for some of these local hosts in the future. They're, takes too much time and too much stress on them. So, but it was a real, I think, wonderful positives and enormous challenges. So, but I guess, Chris, to your question of commercial risk and how we mitigated that risk from a commercial perspective, I guess if you look, I think the three areas that we looked at was in the space of partnership, operational, and participant. So from a partnership perspective, what we did was we very, very lucky because the Mother's Day Classic is basically a primary supporter is the superannuation and the financial services industry of Australia. We're basically run by an army of incredible women and many men across Australia. So we have a very close relationship with our partners, and we went to them early and we said, look, we don't know. To their credit, they all stuck with us, and in how we delivered benefits to them, we flipped all the benefits from an on-the-day delivery to digital benefits, as well as we created a race pack that we delivered to every single participant's door prior to the event. So no matter what, they still got their Mother's Day Classic event experience delivered to their door, being very careful of landfill issues and all sustainable, all reusable. And we asked the sponsors, we actually said to sponsors, you're not allowed to activate on the day. The only way that you're able to activate physically your relationship with Mother's Day Classic is digitally or through an insertion in this race pack. And to their credit, they all stepped up. They all put, amazing, really cool products into this race pack, and with excellent results in terms of their ROI and sponsor recall post event. So that was amazing. Operationally, contracts, we did everything we could to protect ourselves. We had event managers, for example, relationships in all the major cities, and we staggered those in the timeline in terms of packages. And for example, if we cancelled 1 week out, we knew that we could recover some of our event management fees, but obviously we didn't need to do that. We also, I've mentioned, we really had a very low infrastructure model this year. Normally it's the opposite. So our sunk costs were pretty minimal in terms of suppliers and contractors, but the race pack itself was our biggest risk. That was actually all coming, well, pretty much all from China, but we worked with amazing suppliers, and supply chain issues, of course, were top of mind, but we mutually incentivized everyone to make sure that everything arrived on time. But honestly, the biggest issue we had and the biggest risk we had was the timing around Chinese New Year and needing to get that into the country around Chinese New Year. It wasn't actually COVID, because the supply chain out of China was actually excellent for us. And the risk mitigation, and we've talked about refunds. We took a position that we wouldn't be providing refunds because, as I mentioned, we delivered this race pack. So the value was you could still complete your Mother's Day Classic challenge in your own place and own time. You got the Mother's Day Classic experience through the race pack, and you got access to the digital, really interactive, fantastic portal with amazing content. So for our community, we have a highly engaged community around us. That was more than enough.
Great, thanks, Sarah. Some great insights there. Sarah, I'd love to come back to you. And Sarah spoke about supply chain. I'm hearing from various parts of the world that the challenge is a lot around suppliers and supply chain. So an industry decimated, lack of timing companies, marquee companies, AV companies. You're a global brand with obviously a big footprint in Asia and New Zealand. What's your sense of what's happening in the industry? Is there a lack of suppliers? Are prices being pushed up? We heard the great story from Gemma of suppliers being collaborative, but just a general sense for those that haven't staged their events, for those that are listening, that are planning to go forward, that have dates now. What are some of the commercial risks that they may be up against with regard to suppliers and supply chain?
The biggest thing we're finding at the moment is transport. Transport costs have gone through the roof. Obviously, we're a pretty heavy infrastructure business. We've got containers with obstacles that need to be moved around, and getting those containers around is horrendous at the moment. Especially, we've got an event in New Zealand in October. And some of the quote prices we've had versus when we were in New Zealand 2 years ago would triple the price to get containers to and from New Zealand. We're mitigating that risk by slightly changing the way we do business and how our New Zealand event will be structured this year. So there'll still be the same obstacles, but we're working with the trust supplier over there. We're working with some partners over there in terms of Mitre 10 to build some obstacles there that will stay there, so they don't need to be shipped there and back. Our merchandise, which is a pretty lucrative income stream at events, will only take over what we think we can sell there, rather than trying to get merchandise over there, maybe sell a little bit of a range. We'll do a smaller range and leave whatever we need to leave over there. So transport is the biggest cost for us. We try and work quite closely with local suppliers in each of our events, so that kind of reduces some of that commercial risk with having one supplier that dictates our price. The other thing we've done in our business to, I guess, mitigate risk is we've done a completely different pivot from what Sarah and the Mother's Day team have done. We've gone from, we originally had 11 events scheduled in 2020. We got to run 2 before COVID impacted us. This year we've gone to 5 adult events and a kids event, and they're much bigger events. So rather than trying to spread ourselves quite thin and run those 11 events, we're trying to channel people into events within their state.
That's interesting. And from a reaction from your participants at this stage, and folks, we're just about out of time, but I'd like to maybe just run with the I guess acceptance of everyone another 5 minutes, because I think there's a couple of great points that we can finish on. Feedback from the community in terms of that as a revised model.
We've had a very similar feedback model as Gemma. The vast majority of our community have been amazing, really supportive, of love what we're doing, and they understand that they'd rather see the company get through COVID than go to 10 events a year. There are a vocal few who have had some really negative feedback, and even dealing with Sunshine Coast. We had people on social media saying, I'm in Queensland, I'm not following what the Queensland government says, I'm going to go to the event. And we've had to draw a line in the sand and say, you need to follow Queensland health advice. You're not only putting yourself and the Spartan community at risk, you're putting Queensland community at risk, you're putting the whole major events industry at risk. If we have someone walk into an event with COVID and they transmit it in our event, Queensland Health is not going to give anyone else a permit to run an event for 10,000 people.
Yeah, great insights. Last one from you there, Sarah, and then I'm going to come back to Gemma to wrap it up. Your key learning from all of this, from your perspective, but also for the benefit of people that are listening here today that have events that might not have staged an event yet, that are coming forward. If there was one tip from what you've experienced so far that you could give to people, what would that be?
Have a clear communication strategy and have some mitigation plans in place, so that if X, Y, Z does happen, you know what you're going to do. They don't need to be fully built out plans, but you need to understand that your event could get cancelled a week out, it could get cancelled a day out. What do you do? What is your communication strategy in that point? And also having, I guess, a leader within the business that is that key contact. One of the things we have struggled with in our business is that whispers that goes on. So especially in the Sunshine Coast, we've got one person over here saying this, we've got one person over that. In our business, I tend to be the group communicator, where Chris, our MD, is the overarching communicator to people. So I'll disperse the message externally. He generally runs it internally, and we work on a strategy as to when we'll go out and what we're going to tell people when.
So crucial. That webinar that I referred to earlier with the short lead time cancellations, the woman from Riga put up, one of her slides that she put up was Twitter killed the event star, and it was literally they got smashed by Twitter. Someone decided that they were going to get on there, government reacted to that, and that was the end of their event with 15 minutes before the road closures came in. So that communication strategy. Great insights. Thanks so much. Gemma, let's come back to you sitting patiently there for a while. I'd love to just hear your insight in terms of managing commercial risk, and then your tip, if there was one key learning, and then we'll wrap it up by coming back to you, Sarah, for your tip to wrap up the whole session. But Gemma, just commercial risk and your key learning, please.
Yeah, I guess we are in the situation where we manage other people's events, but we also have a small portfolio of our own events. So where we're looking after managed events, obviously the event owner makes a decision on whether they can have an alternate date as a mitigation strategy and postpone, or whether it's their one date and that's what they're going with. So that is really up to the event owner, and I think each event is going to be in different circumstances in that case. But for us running our own events, we absolutely wouldn't run our own event without having a backup date these days. So in terms of mitigating the commercial risk, the best option for us is to be able to postpone an event and to transfer for as many registrations as possible from the original date into your backup date. So we've got our Dwelling Up 100 coming up in September this year, and we've just worked out an alternate date for that one. We've run it past all the key stakeholders and it's now ready to go. So in terms of what we're doing, if you want to have a look on our dwellingup100.com.au website, there's a COVID statement there, and it says, look, if we're running this event under an approved COVID safety plan, so everything will be, shipshape. It'll all be, it's all approved, and we've got your safety in mind. However, in the event of a snap lockdown, this is what we'll do. And number one is we will aim to run this event on the scheduled date. If at all possible, that's what we're going to do. So be prepared for that. We're not going to refund you if we can run this event. Number two is we may have to implement some changes because of that. So be prepared for those. And number three is if we can't run the event on the scheduled date, then we will be running on an alternate date. This is what it is, and this is what we'll do with your registrations. So we're trying to be really clear. That message has only gone up in the last few days, but we'll be promoting that via our social messages and direct mail to our audience as we go along, so that it's all really clear and open and people know what to expect. So it'll be interesting to see how that goes. Hopefully we won't have to use the alternate date, but it's there and we've got it, and we've worked through all those issues in advance, so we know that we can do it if we have to. Wonderful. And just very quickly, because we are 5 over now, just your key tip, if there's any particular lesson that you'd share. I think one of the keys for us is involve professionals. I'm sure most of the people in the audience are event management professionals, but for those that aren't, having event professionals on board has been really worthwhile for the event owners that we've worked with. Volunteer committees and people who aren't running events every day are not necessarily in the headspace to deal with the things that we know we have to deal with. We've always got contingencies in our mind. We know what other people are doing in the industry, and we know how we can manage crowds as well. So we know what the pinch points are and where we need to come up with alternatives. So use professionals would be my tip. Great tip. And just very quickly, Sarah, last one for you. Your key message in terms of someone who's looking for a lesson that you've learned with a countrywide event.
Yeah, obviously agree with everything Gemma and Sarah have said. The big one for us is don't take your eye off the ball on volunteers. Just to add to everything that everyone has said, we normally have about 1,500 to 2,000 volunteers around the country, and it was we followed our normal process. I think we took for granted that it would just roll out and people would still volunteer like they always had. Systems were amazing, our communications were strong, but we really were hit hard by the seniors. We're heavily reliant on the seniors volunteering and also international students. So we ended up, instead of having 1,500 to 2,000 register, we ended up having about 600. And honestly, we'd be lucky if half of them actually turned up on the day. So that it caused enormous, for all of our I'd like to say incredible event planning and cooperation and all the positives. It was just something that really was an enormous challenge right at the tipping point.
We've had to increase our incentives for our volunteers as well. It's been really interesting.
Well, so just
but
quickly,
I would say the volunteers who did turn up were incredible and more than made up for those who didn't, but it just put so much stress in the system.
So can I just, and I am very conscious that we're now running over, but just to pick up, because I think it's a really valuable and important one, is that because of apathy? Is it mostly because of fear? What's driving that no-show, lack of volunteer and then no-show on the day? Is it a fear-based thing? You just said you tried to counter it with incentivization, Sarah, but is that the main thing? Is it incentive, or is it that they're scared of turning up?
I don't think they're scared. I think Sarah touched on a really good point with the international students. We used to, in 2019, would have got a lot of people from universities, especially international students. I think probably I hadn't thought of it before, but potentially the senior angle as well. They may feel that they're not comfortable coming to a mass participation event, but we've had struggles this year with volunteer recruitment.
Thank you. Folks, we could go on for another hour. Some really great insights. Please join me in virtually thanking Sarah Smith, Head of Marketing, Spartan Australia, who joined us from Melbourne. Sarah Clements, General Manager, Mother's Day Classic Foundation, also tuning in from Melbourne. Thank you, Sarah. And from Western Australia in Perth, Gemma Dale, Managing Director of the event team. Thanks so much for your great insights. I think there's some wonderful takeaways. Thanks for those of you that have tuned in and for bearing with us running over. Hope it was valuable. We've said most people have stayed the course, and thanks to Shannon and the MC team for pulling it together. See you on the next one. Bye for now.